Those of you who are on our end of the world, good afternoon or good evening to those of you who are somewhere else. Anne and I are back. We're doing 5 weeks on discussing hormone balance. Last week we talked about cortisol. This week we're going to be talking about insulin, and we're going to be handling thyroid and some of the other sex hormones the next couple of weeks. And then we're going to be bringing you something even more exciting. If you're excited about hormones, you'll have to just stay tuned for the details on what's coming after that. So today, let's talk about insulin. So again, last week we discussed cortisol and how that really works within your system and why it has basically impact on pretty much everything that's going on in your body. Hormones as a whole have an impact on everything that's going on with your body. However, they're not typically the root of everything. They are being impacted by root underlying causes. So a lot of people think, well, the hormones are the problem. I'm like, no, the hormones are the conversation. The hormones are the indicator. They're the canary in the tunnel kind of scenario to let you know that something isn't going well. So let's discuss this. Anthony's going to be getting into, of course, the nutrition and the science part of what's going on with insulin. I'll be discussing more of the emotional, soul, trauma component of how it impacts insulin. So, and I'm just going to start with you and just kick it to you because you know I love to do that again. So you want to explain to people really what insulin is. I think some people think they know, but like really what's going on, insulin resistance, what's going on with insulin as a whole, diabetes, and if it's not diabetes, is it a problem?
Right.
You know, fun stuff.
Yeah. Insulin, we talked last week. There's a system in our body called the endocrine system that is a combination of different glands, and glands release various hormones. So we talked last week, as Kirtan said, about the adrenals, and the adrenals, last week's focus was cortisol, but the adrenals produce many other hormones as well. We'll get into in the coming weeks some of the sex hormones that the adrenals produce. But the insulin is produced by the pancreas, and pancreas has a few different jobs, very diverse jobs too. So in addition to producing insulin, and what's cool about it, from my understanding, only the thyroid and the pancreas can store the hormone that they create. So the thyroid creates and stores thyroid hormone, the pancreas creates and stores insulin. I'll get into a few other things to back that up, but the pancreas also releases enzymes. So when we eat food, hopefully not, food products, we're eating whole foods, right? But what the enzymes that are released by the pancreas into the small intestine, they help break down protein, fat, carbohydrates, things like that. And then the pancreas also releases something called bicarbonate, which essentially is very similar to baking soda, to neutralize the acidic food coming in from the stomach. So the stomach and the small intestine meet. Stomach's a very acidic environment. The small intestine is a very alkaline environment. So how does that happen? Well, when the stomach squirts some of the food into the small intestine, it's
such an appetizing way for food to work.
Squirts, yeah, no. Well, that's what happens.
I know, it's just funny.
It's total peristalsis. So into the small intestine, and it's very acidic. But what neutralizes that is the bicarbonate that the pancreas produces to neutralize it. So insulin, I think I hit upon it last week. Insulin's job is to take glucose out of the blood and drive it into the cells. That's its job. It binds to the receptors on the cells, and the cells open up and say glucose, and they let the glucose in. But what can happen from insulin just being chronically high, eating foods that processed refined foods, processed refined sugars, things like that, is the cells can become insulin resistant, meaning they're not as sensitive to insulin. And when they get the signal to open the door, they need more signals. They need more insulin to do the same job, and then glucose stays in the blood, and then bad things happen. So last week I talked about there's one hormone to get glucose out of the blood, insulin. There's 4 to get glucose back into the blood. There's glucagon, which is, just think of that as the opposite of insulin. There's growth hormone. There's cortisol, and there's epinephrine or adrenaline. Also get sugar, glucose back into the blood. But what's interesting about how this whole thing works is there's another hormone that our body creates that signals the pancreas to make insulin even before we eat carbohydrates. So because it's like priming the pump. And then there's something called a first phase insulin response, which my research shows is probably the best indicator for type 2 diabetes. And how that works is the pancreas starts to release insulin into the blood about 2 minutes after we consume carbohydrates. Now, it takes a lot longer than that for when we consume it until it gets into the blood. But again, it's just like priming the system for when we do get this influx of carbohydrates or glucose, that it's going to do its job and drive it into the cells.
So 1 to take it out, 4 to put it in.
Yeah, one to get it into the cells. I'm sorry, 1 to get it out of the blood, 4 to get it back into the blood.
Which is, gives us another indication of why people struggle with this. Is one of the number one most challenged issues for people when they have trouble with losing weight, they have trouble with aging quickly, when they have trouble with digestion issues, when they have trouble with their energy levels.
2 of those 4 hormones to get glucose back into the blood are from stress, cortisol, and epinephrine.
Anthony,
adrenaline.
Why does that happen? Why does that happen?
No idea. We talked, we spent, I think you can say fairly last week, we talked at length about the stress response, and what it really boils down to, and I'm going to really simplify it, is it's these hormones that signal our genes to create proteins that make us sick or suppress suppress protein creation or protein synthesis that helps us heal. So that's really why hormones are so important. And you're absolutely right. It's not hormones that are the problem. It's what's causing the imbalance of hormones that's the problem.
And what we see a lot with our clients, they'll come to us with a digestion issue. They'll come to us with fatigue. They'll come to us even all the way in with an autoimmune condition diagnosis. And they'll say, this just started, or this just started a year or so ago. And what they don't recognize is that it didn't just start. They just started noticing. So a lot of what is going on in our bodies now, whether we're 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 years old, started when we were 5 or 10 or 20. And then it compounded over time. And what we could get away with in our 20s is not necessarily what we can get away with in our 50s or 60s or 40s. So what you start seeing is that hormones are influencing how our bodies work, and we are influencing how our hormones are produced, are balanced, and work within our systems.
So if you, emotions.
Yeah, it comes back to, and again, I'm going to oversimplify now. Does your body feel safe and connected and balanced, or does it not? And up to the age of 7 is when we start really developing our understanding, our paradigm of what is considered safe for us and what is not. So if you grew up in a situation where there was a lot of chaos, your body is constantly running up here trying to manage the chaos. But if you get really used to chaos, what ends up happening is, whether you realize it or not, subconsciously you start looking for situations where it feels like chaos because it's so familiar. However, that keeps your body in a state of chronic stress. And when you've been in chronic stress too long, what happens is there's usually a last straw. There's usually the thing that broke the camel's back. There's the last moment that pushes it over the edge. And then you start noticing, because it's finally a symptom that your body has, that you've gone, oh, something's not right. But I don't know about you guys, but I know from the time I was young, I first got my period. It was, it was kind of a train wreck of an experience. And my mom took me to the doctor, and right away the doctor said, well, this is normal. And what I want to make sure that you all are very clear about, and Anthony and I talk about this a lot, is that there is a big difference between normal and common. And just because it's common for somebody to have imbalance issues, just because it's common for people to have problems with sugar levels, just because it's common for people to hit a wall, essentially, when they start getting closer to menopause or a certain age, doesn't mean that it's normal.
That's why
right?
the lab ranges are so large, because it's common, and the more common that the as a country and a population that the markers start to get on the higher and lower sides, that's when the ranges start to or further expand and expand and expand.
So the normal range really should be called the common range. It's what the average person really looks like, and what they're experiencing. And that will fluctuate and change over the years as our country or our people or our society continues to get sicker. We don't want to be common. We actually, at this point, don't want to be what everybody else considers normal. We want to be healthy. We want to be optimal. Right. So, Anthony, when it comes to insulin, because we hear things all the time, we actually hear things coming in from people who have seen registered dietitians and doctors and other nutritionists who say, oh, well, I can't have carrots and I can't have fruit because I have insulin problems. What do you have to say about all that?
Because they contain fiber. So if you're eating them as whole foods, the fiber slows down the absorption of the fructose in the fruit case, or the sugar. So it slows down the absorption if you're eating a whole food. If you're drinking carrot juice, well, that's really gonna spike your insulin. But even so, it's there's an enormous difference between something sustained or just like a spike and a drop. There's an enormous difference between the two. So even carrot juice with the fiber removed, it's gonna absorb faster, but it's not going to keep your glucose elevated for hours and hours and hours and hours unless you keep doing it. But there's so much research. I mean, even oatmeal. So I can't remember the doctor's name. He got people out of diabetes by putting them on an oatmeal diet, because it's high in fiber. It also is relatively high or respectable amounts of protein and a little bit of fat too. But we are huge fans of fruits and vegetables, whole foods. It's the processed, refined foods that just don't serve you. Now, do we Kirsten and I eat processed, refined foods? Time to time, we do. We go out to restaurants and we can't control certain environments. And our home's different. We have organic blue corn chips that's processed. I mean, technically, if you make applesauce from apples, that's processed, but that's getting a little
crazy,
a little ridiculous. But yeah, we don't buy that.
No, and we also pay attention, right? 80% of the time, we're doing the things that help our body the most, right? And the other 20%, your body should be able to manage some things. Now, we're never eating gluten. We're never eating dairy. Anthony doesn't eat meat or meat products. So we found the diets that work for us. What we found for most people, if there's gluten and dairy, not and dairy in your system, you're having an inflammatory response on a regular basis. And they're addictive foods, believe it or not, and they can cause major problems in your system. But in the end, if you take everything apart and you look at it, it doesn't matter how specifically perfect you are with your food, because there's no such thing as being perfect. It's what is your body perceiving to be stressful. There's physical stress, like eating foods that don't work for you. There's emotional stress where you're not able to release grief from something that you've done that has happened in your life, that you're not releasing the grief. And there's mental stress, right? The idea that I'm not good enough, the idea that you have to be strong and you can't talk about your feelings, right? There's energetic stress or spiritual stress. If you don't feel connected to a bigger purpose, if you felt that you had a purpose at some point and now you're in an empty nest situation, or you've retired recently, or you just no longer get excited about what you do during the day, that's energetic or spiritual stress. Right? So you really have to start looking at your life and saying, in all of those areas, where might my body be feeling stressed? Because what I can promise you, and Anthony, I know is going to back me on this, is that it's never just one thing. It's never like, oh, there's a food that I'm eating, it's going to fix all things. Typically, we're getting stress from all those areas, but when they compound and they build together is when the body can't handle it. There's usually one thing that is the bigger of those issues. So when we work with our clients, we help them look at all of those areas to say, where does your body perceive stress? And just because you're familiar with a feeling doesn't mean it's necessarily good or healthy for you. And when it comes to insulin, the reason the body does what it does when it comes to insulin spiking is because your body thinks it needs to run or hide, and it needs to hightail it out of here because there's something coming for it, whether it's a bear or a tax bill or some other issue. If you're perceiving that you're under stress or you're in a situation where it's dangerous, your body needs the spike, right? It needs the insulin. It needs the spike in cortisol. It needs these spikes to get us out of here. But in a normal situation, I'm going to use that term very loosely here, but in a healthy situation, if you ever have a spike like that, it should be very temporary. What ends up happening is we don't realize that we're resonating in that energy all the time. So the spiking and the body needing more and more and more of these hormones to be shot through our body or to be spiked becomes higher and higher. Now, Jody's saying, I'm such a big fan of fruits and veggies, but I've been challenged with the carnivore diet. Why do people believe this is good? Anthony, my vegan man, would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, look at some of the research coming about the carnivore diet and the negative effects of the carnivore diet. I've never done it. I would say it's relatively new in comparison to vegan or vegetarian or Mediterranean or paleo. It's new. At least with research with cardiovascular disease, you don't develop cardiovascular disease overnight. It takes 20, 30 years to develop. That's why the whole French paradigm, like the French eat cheese and wine and stuff and have low rates of heart disease. Yeah, well, because it takes 20, 30 years for cardiovascular disease to happen. So that's been debunked. So, watching the upcoming years, because of the high content of saturated fat with the carnivore diet, watch and see what the research says with correlation to cardiovascular disease. And not only that, meat is, our bodies make a substance called arachidonic acid, and we need it because it promotes inflammation. Now, keep in mind, inflammation is not all bad. Inflammation is a healing response. It's just when we're in a sustained state of inflammation, that's not good. So our body needs to inflame in order to heal. That's why when you stub your toe, you get inflammation because it's a healing response. But only animal protein contains arachidonic acid too. So we get dietary arachidonic acid. So our body makes it, then we're eating it, if you're eating animal products. So you're getting an excessive amount of arachidonic acid, and it's just going to lead to excess inflammation.
And what we've seen is we have to find what works for each person, right? Like, I've been vegan. It did not work for me long-term. It was great as a short-term kind of reset for my system, but I just found that things started going kind of haywire, specifically my thyroid and sex hormones started going out of whack when I was eating no animal protein. So I added some fish back in, and then I've added in some other things. I'll eat things like lamb or elk, beef, chicken, but I don't eat a ton of it. Like, when I'm eating it, I'm still eating a bunch of vegetables. It's usually like vegetables, and it's accompanied by some animal protein. And as we get older, it's harder and harder for our stomachs to actually break down animal protein because we don't have as much acid that we develop in our stomach as we continue to get older. So there's a whole bunch of pieces to this that we have to learn how to move with our systems, work with our bodies, and not try to just scientifically figure out the most perfect thing. And in the end, Anthony and I are really flexible as far as understanding. You have to be flexible to understand your system. From one year to the next, life changes. Our bodies change. We also may be in an environment where there may be more toxins and there may be some other things that are just higher inflammatory things. So you may have to turn around and look at other things you can control. We can't always control our air quality. We can't always control everything that's going on. But the things we can control. So as we continue to age, we continue to do what we do and move through the universe. We have to work with what works for our bodies today. Maybe it worked last week, but doesn't work anymore. So we're just paying attention. And that's what we try to teach our clients. And that goes back to the energetic connection. If you don't have a good energetic connection and you don't resonate well with what your system is telling you, you won't know how to make these tweaks and make these shifts and make these changes. But if you are working with anyone, if you've ever read a book or you're talking to a practitioner or you're working with one of your friends who found this perfect diet, if there is a belief that it is the one diet that fits all, it's the one thing that fills all of the needs that everyone has, if it fixes all things, then you should probably take a deep breath and look at that diet twice, right? Because it doesn't, or else we would all be eating exactly the same way, and we don't for a reason. Even with our dogs, we feed them differently based on what their needs are. Right. And we found the things that work for the dogs that we have at the time. And we've shifted their diets over the years too. So, animals that are domesticated are different. They've found some ways to adjust. And then Jody's saying, oh, completely, my stress, I found completely imbalanced my hormones, even when I was doing everything right with her diet. So she's 100% correct. You have to adjust over time. And then big things, life happens sometimes. We lose a loved one, we lose a job, something unexpected happens. That's a big deal. Our body goes into a state of stress that's different than what we're used to. Sometimes we have to adjust around that for a period of time as we're dissolving and working through and processing that level of stress. But if you're so disconnected that you don't even see that and you don't make adjustments for it, there are life-altering moments that are going to crush you. And what we hear from a lot of people now, Anthony being, what are you, 55 now? I'm like totally lost track.
Yeah,
You're 55.
55.
He'll be 56 in July, right? And I just turned 50. We've moved through different stages of life, and we still have stages of life to go through. Our clients are in different stages. We have clients that are 19 and we have clients that are in their 80s. But most of our clients, not shockingly, whether they're male or female, are somewhere between the ages of 40 and 60 for a reason. It's when some of the biggest shifts in your body start to really occur that people have been told over time are supposed to happen, and then it's supposed to be hard and awful. And insulin has a lot to do with that, right? Men and women both go through, with Anthony and I will talk about in the next couple of weeks in a much more detail, but we go through menopause or andropause for the men. And a lot of people say, well, it's because of the menopause, or it's because of this, that my insulin stopped working right, or that my body just gained all this weight, or this happened. I'm like, no, it was a build up to that point where your body then wasn't prepared to manage this additional life shift or this biology change that we all go through at some point. But it doesn't have to be a train wreck of an issue. I remember as a kid, and I grew up in an Irish Catholic family of a lot of drinkers and a lot of processed food eaters. And there's a lot of diabetes on both sides of my family. Pretty much everyone on my dad's side of the family has some level of diabetes, or what is it called? Right, not pre-diabetes, before that.
Insulin resistance?
Yeah, that, but there's another term for it.
Metabolic
Whatever
syndrome?
that is. No, it's not a fancy one usually. It's just, whether it's pre-diabetes, basically. All my family has those issues. My mother's family, lots of diabetes in that family, lots of weight issues, lots of challenges all around, and all of the pieces. So why are a couple of us doing well and the rest of us are pretty much struggling with the weight and all the things? When you start to look at how we were all raised, the idea of that was just going to happen to us, people kind of just leaned into it, right? Why prevent it? Because we're going to end up with it. We can't do anything about it. So that's even like a mental conditioning kind of thing that you may have grown up with as well. All the women, basically, once they have kids, then they're just going to gain the weight. Or once they do this, they're just going to gain it. Once you hit 30, then it's over, right? But there's just a cultural kind of component to it as well. And it doesn't have to be that way. As Anthony was saying, epigenetics, we have actual influence over which genes that we have will express and which ones will be suppressed. So, Anthony, what else about insulin do you think would be important for us to discuss here?
So here's the irony. As far as labs go, there's actually a better marker than insulin that's a better marker than insulin itself. And the reason for that is insulin is metabolized by the liver. So when you get a blood draw, insulin should be fasted in the morning. Your liver can metabolize some of the insulin, and the marker could not be as accurate as one that I like to use, preferably, is called C-peptide. So it's more accurate marker for insulin than insulin itself.
As far as insulin in that moment, or insulin as far as its health?
Just for labs. So what I'm saying is, if someone wants me to put a panel together for them, rather than looking at insulin, I rather run C-peptide, because it's a more accurate marker for insulin. So C-peptide is a part of the insulin molecule, but it doesn't get metabolized by the liver. So that's why you can get more accurate reading than insulin itself. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And see, this is the stuff that I just love to listen to, because I don't love to learn it, but I love listening to Anthony talk about it. So
yeah, insulin, actually, this is something I learned kind of recently. I always wondered why, this is way beyond us and what we do, but I'm a bodybuilder, so I'm intrigued by this, and bodybuilders, like at the professional Mr. Olympia level, will actually take insulin. They'll inject insulin into their bodies, and I'm like, why? What another function of insulin that it also does is it slows down muscle degradation. Because our bodies build muscle and break down muscle, so insulin slows down the breaking down of muscle, which is pretty neat.
Which, of course, is nothing that you would do, because that would be insane.
Yeah, there's no interest in that. It's just another function of insulin that I never knew about until pretty recently.
So let's break it all down. So the most important thing is that you're really eating whole foods, lots of greens. Whether you choose to eat meat or not, you're not eating a ton of it, right? And you're not eating a lot of processed foods, added sugars, processed sugars, where you can have some honey here and there. There's fruit, natural whole foods, really, is what you're looking at. And you're eating lots of things with fiber in it as well. So I'm sure Anthony would recommend beans for most people, and other things that have fiber in it, like the fruit in its whole state. Apples, phenomenal, right? Berries. The other thing is to start checking out your stress levels. And we want to kind of be broader about what you really look at as stress. What's your mental stress level right now? What's your emotional stress level right now? What's your physical stress level? What's your spiritual or energetic stress level right now? If you feel disconnected to purpose, if you don't feel that you really want to get up in the morning because you're excited about what you're going to do that day, that is a breakdown on what's occurring on a stress level. So we look at our clients as whole people, and we look at it from a 360 perspective to say, what pieces of this could you be looking at? Because this is going to have your ability to get up in the morning and be excited about what you're doing that day, your ability to be connected to a purpose, to a bigger picture, your body taking in physically what it needs, whether it's movement and the right type of activity, whether it's yoga, weight-bearing exercise, that kind of thing is really important. And the type of exercise you're doing is really important. And it changes as we get older as well, what you really need and what's most important. So you want you to look at that. We want you to look at the foods that you're taking into your system. And look at the environment in which you live. And we mean that from a toxic perspective, the water, the air quality. But we also want you to look at that from an emotional perspective and a connective perspective of who are you spending your time with? If those people are stressed and those people are toxic and those people are causing more stress in your system, that could also be having an impact, a direct impact on how your insulin works in your system. So it's not just, I'm going to go to the doctor and take my metformin. We have to think from a bigger perspective, because diabetes type 2 and type 3, which is a whole nother story. Type 2 is more of the pancreatic and insulin resistant body piece. The type 3 is more of the mental. The Alzheimer's and diabetes have been reclassified now into something called type 3 diabetes. Something that if you're struggling with that within your household, someone that you love is having an issue with Alzheimer's and diabetes, you should absolutely look up. Alzheimer's and dementia, you should absolutely look up type 3 diabetes. I have a parent right now that we're working on that right now. And the things that influence it the most are stress levels. And then what's going on with the body, emotionally, mentally, and physically. So start looking at these things. Start recognizing that insulin resistance, insulin being, as we like to say, our technical term of out of whack, issues with cortisol, they're all indicators that there's something else at a core level that is not feeling safe, secure, balanced, or grounded. And those things, those indicators, insulin issues, hormone issues, can rebalance themselves when you start really looking at what does the body believe is happening right now? Does it need to go run from something? Or does it need to stay where it is and feel safe and calm right in the environment in which it's in right now? All right, Anthony, any other last minute pieces on that?
There's actually a question from Instagram. You want me to read it to you?
Yes, please.
It says, what about the thought of everything in moderation? I believe now that if you do eat meat, it should be organic.
Well, there's organic, which is different than grass-fed, which is different than grass-finished. So there, a lot of the terms right now are kind of getting thrown around.
Yeah, well, with
yeah,
meat,
wild.
with fish, right.
Yeah, I was at a
pastured eggs. Yeah, there's a lot of terminology.
Yeah, there's a lot of terminology. There was a restaurant we were in a couple of years ago where I asked if the fish was wild caught, and they said it's organic, and I said that's not a thing. I was like, what does that mean? Because I had not heard that term for fish. And she said, oh, that means that we're feeding the fish organic food. I'm like, so it's not wild.
It's farmed.
It's farmed organic. Like, it was very confusing, but you got to be careful. People are throwing around terms sometimes that don't always like meet up with what's really going on. But grass finished is actually what you're looking for when you're looking more at beef, because it means that they have to complete the animal's life with just grass. If it's just grass fed, they actually can feed the animal pretty much whatever they want the last 30 days. There's a lot of terms right now, but the biggest thing that we see is, yes, if you are eating animal proteins, to do the best you can to try and find the highest quality of that particular meat as possible. Yes, that's the thing too. But a smaller amount, typically we are taking in so much, and we don't need anywhere near the amount of protein that most of us think we do. The United States, especially, we eat far, far, far more protein than our bodies typically need for most people. What was there was something else in that question?
Yeah. How do you feel about eating everything in moderation?
And I think that yes, in moderation. The only thing that Anthony and I kind of have a black and white line on is gluten and dairy. We have never seen anybody excel with gluten and dairy in their diet. We just haven't. So again, I'm sure there's people out there that are going to argue with that one and say, oh no, I'm doing great when I eat all my dairy. And we're like, more power to you. If that works for you, then you do you. When we work with our clients, it's something that's the only kind of hard line that we typically take with our clients. Otherwise, it's let's find out what works best for you. And yes, in moderation. Like when Anthony and I eat out, again, gluten and dairy are not something that we allow into our systems. But we'll eat, gluten-free pizza. We'll go out and eat things that are on gluten-free bread sometimes. Like it's in moderation. But we also do most of our cooking here, and we control the ingredients that go into what's going on. So, but yes. But if you can recognize that a lot of your stress levels emotionally can be lowered, you can do things in moderation differently. But a lot of people have to be way more strict with their diet because they're not managing what's going on they're not governing their emotional response, and they're in a state of fight or flight all the time. So,
the cup is full all the time.
The cup is full. The stress level cup is full to here. So any little thing is going to push you right over the edge. So there's a couple of things. We have an event going on. We have a series that also is going on called the Revivify Masterclass series. It's going on right now. We had done 4 of them. We have 1 more to go in that 5-part series. If you go to nourish123challenge.com, the 5th one is coming up on the 28th of February. But if you missed the other 4, the replays are instantaneously available, but you have to register for it to get access to those replays and to get access to the live event that's coming up on the 28th. And at the end of, I was going to say the end of the month, but the end of the month is actually the 29th this year because it is a leap year. At the end of the month, at the end of my head, the end of the month is actually the 2nd. But so Sunday, the 3rd of March, all of that is going to go down. So you're going to miss out on the replays if you haven't watched them. And we're putting up a new program that's coming up in March that I'm excited to talk about next week. So if you want any of the things that are going on with our Revivify Masterclass series, it's nourish123challenge.com. In there, you can get access to the last 4 of the pieces of that series, and you can also join us live on the 28th for the 5th one. All of the details on all of the speakers and all the people that we invited in to speak with us on that are there, and they have been amazing, and I've been I'm so grateful to be able to work with the women who have come in to be our experts during all of the amazing things, including we brought in experts on addiction eating and all sorts of issues. So just go grab those. And if you're at the point where you're like, hey, I'd just like to work with you guys, I want to talk to you directly if it would be right to work with you as a private client, then you can also take that quiz, which is the thing that looks like it's popping up right now. But oh, yes, here it is. You can also book a laser health conversation with us to say, hey, is this the right fit for me right now? Is this the right thing to work with you guys at a higher level? You can go to nourish123.com/heal. And Anthony or I are going to pop onto a conversation with you, and we're going to discuss with you in about 20 to 30 minutes, really what it looks like to work with us and what our trajectory or your trajectory could be in your healing process. So you can go to nourish123.com/heal to do that. And if you are at a point where you're like, I want 2024 to look different than 2023, then now is the only time that you really have to do anything about it right now. Do it in the now. Because then otherwise you're going to be looking back going, why didn't I just do that before? All right, nourish123.com/heal if you're looking to have a conversation with us, or you can go to nourish123challenge.com to get the replays and to get invited into the live event that we are doing for our masterclass series called Revivify. Nourish123.com. 123challenge.com. So. All right, you guys have a good rest of your Monday, and we